Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at something that really, I think, affects all of us in one way or another: substance use and mental health. These issues have such a huge impact on people's lives, families, and even, entire communities. And I think we can all agree that actually getting help isn't always a walk in the park. Between busy schedules, the cost of treatment, even just finding a therapist in your area, and yeah, let's not forget about the stigma. It can feel really overwhelming sometimes. So, what if there was a way to make treatment way more accessible? Well, that's where web-based interventions come in, and that is what we're going to be unpacking today.
Yeah, these interventions really do have remarkable potential. It's all about using technology like websites and apps to deliver these evidence-based therapies that we know work. Things like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT as it's more commonly known, and motivational interviewing.
So instead of like that sometimes intimidating trip to a therapist's office, you could be, working on your mental health from the comfort of your own home. That sounds pretty convenient, right? But of course, the big question is, do these digital therapies actually work? Well, to figure that out, we dug into a recent review that analyzed 42 studies. And this review included data from around 10,000 participants.
Okay, so before we jump into those juicy findings, let's paint a picture of what these interventions actually look like in practice. Think interactive modules, videos, personalized feedback, even progress trackers. It's almost like taking therapy and making it engaging and something that can fit into your everyday life.
That honestly sounds way less intimidating than what I had pictured. But let's get down to brass tacks here. Did these interventions actually help people reduce their substance use?
The results across the studies were pretty impressive. They showed some really significant drops in both alcohol and drug use. And they didn't just look at substance use broadly, they actually delved into specific substances. So we're talking cannabis stimulants, even opioids.
Wow, so we have evidence here that these interventions can be effective across a pretty wide range of substances. What were some of the specific findings from this review that really jumped out at you?
Oh, there were a few. So one study found that web-based CBT was actually really helpful for veterans with PTSD. It helped them significantly reduce the number of days where they were drinking heavily. This kind of intervention could really be a game changer for veterans who might face more barriers to traditional therapy.
Absolutely. That's a huge win, especially for a group that we know often really struggles to access care. Were there any studies in that review that looked at other specific programs?
Absolutely. So researchers in another study found some really promising results for reducing cannabis use in adults who also have ADHD. And they used a program called Can Reduce 2.0. What's interesting here is that it really shows how these interventions are becoming more tailored to specific needs and conditions.
It's not just a one-size-fits-all approach, which makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned earlier that these interventions weren't just for substance use, right? What about their impact on mental health conditions?
Now, this is where things get really fascinating. Web-based interventions are showing tons of promise for conditions like PTSD, depression, and anxiety. In fact, multiple studies found that web-based CBT led to a significant reduction in PTSD symptoms for veterans.
Wow, that's incredible. Given how debilitating PTSD can be and all those challenges veterans face in accessing traditional therapy, this could be a real lifeline for them. What
Oh,
about
yeah.
other mental health challenges?
Well, there's a program called Take Care of Me that's been really effective at reducing both depression and anxiety in adults who are also dealing with alcohol misuse and depression at the same time. And what's key here is that it really addresses those co-occurring disorders, which, as we know, are very common.
Treating the whole person, not just individual symptoms, that's a really powerful approach. And these improvements that we're talking about, they weren't just temporary, right?
That's the remarkable part. Many studies actually show that those improvements in PTSD, depression, and anxiety actually stuck around, even after the program ended, suggesting a lasting positive impact.
Now, that is what we like to hear. But did these studies only look at symptom reduction, or did they actually look beyond that? Did they look at whether these programs helped people in other areas of their lives as well?
Oh, they absolutely did. What I really love about this area of research is that it doesn't just focus on those clinical outcomes. For example, there was a study on a program called Breaking These, and it actually showed that it increased help-seeking behavior in people who use amphetamines.
So it's not just that people are getting better, but they're also becoming more proactive about their health. That's a pretty powerful combination, right?
Exactly. And remember, Take Care of Me, that program we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Well, researchers also found that it led to improvements in people's overall quality of life and how well they could function day to day. So it wasn't just about, feeling better emotionally. Their lives were actually improving in real, tangible ways.
I love that. Okay, so we've seen how these web-based interventions can help with both substance use and mental health. But how do they actually stack up against traditional therapy? I mean, were there studies that compared the two?
Yeah, there were. And the findings are pretty interesting. Some studies actually found that the web-based interventions were just as effective as traditional face-to-face therapy. So, for example, researchers compared web-based CBT for alcohol use disorder to traditional CBT. And you know what? They found them to be comparable in terms of their effectiveness.
So that's really interesting. So it sounds like they're at least as good as traditional therapy in some cases, but were there any cases where they were actually better?
Believe it or not, yes. One study found that a therapist-guided web-based self-help program was actually more effective than self-help alone. Just that little bit of guidance can make a huge difference.
It kind of makes you wonder if the future of therapy is really this blend of technology and human interaction. But let's talk about practicality for a second. I mean, if these interventions are going to make a real difference, they really need to be accessible to everyone, right?
You're absolutely right. And that is honestly one of the most exciting aspects of this whole field. The convenience and the accessibility of these web-based interventions make them ideal for reaching people who might otherwise struggle to get treatment.
Yeah, earlier we were talking about some of those barriers like cost location and the stigma surrounding mental health. So, how are these interventions addressing those issues?
Well, one way is through what's called the stepped care approach. Basically, this means using web-based interventions as a first-line option for people with mild to moderate symptoms. It's sort of a way to offer support really early on, potentially preventing things from getting worse.
So, kind of like a triage system for mental health. I like that. But what about people who need more intensive support? Are these interventions meant to replace traditional therapy altogether?
Not necessarily. It's more about, having more options and meeting people where they are in their journey. So for some people, web-based interventions might be all they need, but for others, they might be a stepping stone to more intensive treatment, or even a way to complement the therapy that they're already getting.
It's about creating a more flexible and personalized approach to care. And you know what? I really like that. It seems like we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've seen that these web based interventions can be effective for both substance use and mental health. We've also seen that they can be comparable to or even better than traditional therapy in some cases. And they have this incredible potential to increase access to care for folks who are struggling. That's a lot to take in.
It is. But we're really just scratching the surface here. In part two, we're going to be taking a closer look at some of the limitations of the current research, and we'll also delve into those mind-blowing possibilities for the future of web-based interventions that we sort of hinted at earlier. So, before we get too carried away with all this incredible potential of web-based interventions, we do have to remember that, like any new approach, there are some limitations in areas where we really need more research.
Of course, we want to make sure we're not getting ahead of ourselves here. So, what are some of the things we need to keep in mind?
Well, one thing that the review really highlighted was that a lot of the studies had some limitations just in how they were designed. For example, some studies only had smaller groups of participants, which makes it harder to know for sure if those findings would actually apply to a larger, more diverse group of people.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to understand an entire forest by only looking at one tree. So, what were some of the other limitations that the review found?
Another thing to think about is how long the studies actually followed up with the people who participated. A lot of them only tracked people for maybe a few months, which is a pretty short period of time. So while those initial results were really great, we need those longer-term studies to really know if the benefits stick around, over time.
Right. It's one thing to see improvements after a few months, but the real question is, are people still, feeling better and benefiting from these interventions a year or two down the line?
Exactly. And along those same lines, there's also the question of cost effectiveness. Are these interventions ultimately a more efficient and sustainable way to actually deliver care in the long run? We need more research to really figure that out.
That makes sense. I mean, more research is needed, but that's not really surprising, right? This is still a relatively new field.
That's very true. But even with all of these limitations, the overall message from the review was really, really positive. The potential here is just huge. And honestly, I think the most exciting part is how this type of intervention can be combined with other technologies. And that has the potential to create these even more powerful and personalized tools.
Oh, now you're talking. Okay, let's get into those future possibilities. What are some of the things on the horizon that have you so fired up?
Well, one area that I think is just ripe with possibilities is the use of artificial intelligence, or AI, and, machine learning. Imagine a world where these interventions can adapt to your specific needs and your progress. in real time.
Whoa. So it's almost like having this virtual therapist that's constantly learning and adjusting its approach just based on how you're doing.
Exactly. AI can be used to tailor just about everything, from the content and the pace of the program to the type of support that's being offered.
Hmm.
It can even help predict when someone might be at risk of relapsing, and then, potentially intervene even before it happens.
That's incredible. It really takes the idea of personalized care to a whole new level. But what about the human element in all of this? I mean, are we talking about replacing therapists with robots?
No, not at all. I think the future of therapy is going to involve a really collaborative approach,
Hmm.
one where technology can enhance and extend the reach of human therapists.
Judah.
Technology can never truly replace the empathy, the intuition, and just that deep understanding as a skilled clinician brings to the table.
Okay, so it's more about, giving therapists superpowers and not making them obsolete.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us to the question of mobile platforms. I mean, smartphones are just everywhere these days, right?
Hmm.
So that means we can actually deliver these interventions directly into the hands of the people who need them, anytime, anywhere.
No more being tied to a computer, so therapy basically becomes part of everyday life.
Precisely. And think about the potential for, integrating these interventions with other health tracking apps, even wearables. We could be gathering real-time data on things like sleep patterns, physical activity, even mood fluctuations.
Wow, that's a ton of information. It could really help us understand, the connection between physical health and mental health, and then, even tailor interventions more precisely.
Exactly. And it's not just about collecting all this data, it's about actually using that data to provide, immediate feedback and support. Imagine getting a notification on your phone that says, "Hey, looks like you might be feeling stressed. Try these breathing exercises." Or, based on your activity levels today, it might be a good idea to connect with your support group.
It's almost like having this virtual coach right in your pocket, cheering you on and helping you stay on track. I love it. But with all this data being collected, what about privacy?
That is a valid concern. It's something that needs to be addressed head on. As we move forward with these advancements, data security and user privacy need to be top priorities. People really need to have transparency and control over their own information.
Yeah. Because it's a trade-off, isn't it? The potential benefits are huge,
Mm,
but we really need to make sure that these technologies are being developed and used responsibly.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, now, are you ready for another leak into the future? What about using virtual reality or VR for therapy?
Whoa, hold on, VR for therapy. That sounds straight out of science fiction.
I know, right? But it's actually closer than you think. Researchers are already using VR to treat things like phobias, anxiety disorders, even PTSD.
Oh, wow. So instead of just, talking about your fear of spiders, you could actually face a virtual spider in a safe, controlled environment.
Exactly. VR allows you to gradually expose yourself to those challenging situations and practice your coping skills. But, without any real-world consequences, it's a really powerful tool.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But those VR headsets can be pretty expensive.
Huh.
So is this type of therapy even accessible to everyone?
That's a fair point. I mean, right now, VR technology is still pretty costly, so that can definitely limit its availability. But as the technology keeps getting better and it becomes more common, I think the price will eventually come down, and that'll make it more accessible to everyone.
So it sounds like it's really just a matter of time before VR therapy becomes a more mainstream option.
Yeah, I believe so. And just imagine the potential for using VR to actually create those supportive online communities or even group therapy sessions. People from all over the world could connect and share their experiences and support each other, all in this virtual space that feels real and engaging.
That's amazing. It could really be a game changer for people who live in rural areas or maybe have mobility issues. And it could also help to reduce the stigma that's so often associated with seeking mental health care.
Absolutely. And the really beautiful thing about all these technologies is that they can all work together. We could have these AI-powered interventions that are delivered through people's smartphones, and then those interventions could be enhanced by these VR experiences. It's about creating this whole network of support.
It's like weaving this safety net of care, using both technology and human expertise to create this truly personalized and empowering experience.
I love that analogy. And, just like with any good safety net, each part is important, so we need to keep pushing those boundaries of what's possible with technology, while at the same time, staying focused on developing these tools in a responsible and human-centered way.
I think that's a really important point. So, okay, we've talked about the limitations of the current research. We've explored some pretty incredible possibilities with AI, mobile platforms, and even VR. So, where do we go from here? What are the key things that you want listeners to really take away from this part of our deep dive?
Hmm. Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that this field is just bursting with potential. We're really on the verge of a revolution in how we approach mental health and substance use care. And technology is absolutely going to play a key role in all of this. But it's not just about the technology itself. It's about how we use that technology to help people to expand access to care and to create, a more just and compassionate world.
I think that's beautifully said. And I think it's also important to emphasize that this is a constantly evolving landscape. I mean, what we're seeing today is really just the beginning. The future of web-based interventions is going to be shaped by continued research, by innovation, and most importantly, by the needs and experiences of the people that these interventions are designed to help.
Absolutely. And that's where our listeners come in. We need everyone to be a part of this conversation, to share their perspectives and to advocate for the responsible and equitable development of these really powerful tools.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. From, the current state of these web-based interventions to the really mind-blowing possibilities of the future. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have one final thought-provoking question for you.
Oh, I'm always up for a good thought-provoking question. What do you have in mind?
Well, we've talked a lot about the potential benefits of all these technologies, but what about the potential downsides? Are there any risks or any unintended consequences that we should be thinking about?
That's an excellent question. And it's one that deserves really careful consideration. I think one potential risk is this idea of over-reliance on technology at the expense of human connection.
Mm.
And while these interventions can be incredibly helpful, they are tools. They're not replacements for human interaction and support.
Right. We don't want people to feel isolated or like they're just, interacting with a screen all the time. There's something so unique and so powerful about connecting with another human being that something technology just can't fully replicate.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Another potential concern is this idea of widening the digital divide.
Yeah.
We really need to make sure that these interventions are accessible to everyone, regardless of their income, their tech skills, or even where they live.
So it's really about equity and inclusion. We don't want to create a system where only certain people benefit from these advancements.
Exactly. And that's where thoughtful policy and advocacy really come in. We need to make sure that these technologies are developed and used in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
That's some really important food for thought as we, continue to explore the future of mental health and substance use care.
Indeed. And, while there are these challenges to think about, I remain optimistic about the potential of these web-based interventions to truly transform lives.
I share your optimism. This has been a really incredibly insightful conversation, but it looks like we've come to the end of part 2 of our deep dive.
I know time flies when you're having fun exploring the cutting edge of technology.
Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. So over these past 2 parts, we've really been exploring this world of web-based interventions for substance use and mental health.
It really has been quite a journey.
We've seen how effective they can be, how they stack up against that traditional therapy model, and we've even gotten to peek into the future a bit, with AI, VR, and mobile platforms.
Yeah, it has been quite a journey. It's like we took this deep dive. Now it's time to come back up to the surface and see what we've brought back with us. So let's, really break down what we've learned and leave our listeners with some final food for thought.
Okay, let's open up that treasure chest. What pearls of wisdom have we found?
Well, I think we can definitely say with confidence that web-based interventions aren't just a fad. They're not just going to disappear. They're really a powerful tool that has the potential to revolutionize how we approach mental health and substance use care.
Yeah, we've seen how they're not just about replacing traditional therapy, but they're about giving people more choices, meeting them where they're at in their journey and making treatment more accessible.
Exactly. And while the research so far has been, incredibly promising, I think it is important to acknowledge that there are still some limitations. We need more studies, longer-term studies that look at cost effectiveness.
It's like with any new health intervention, we need that solid evidence to really know what works best in the long run. But I think even with all of that in mind, we can't lose sight of that human element in all of this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Technology can enhance therapy for sure, but it can't replace the power of human connection, empathy, and understanding.
So it's really about finding that right balance, wouldn't you say? Like using technology to its fullest potential while still holding on to that human touch, because it's so essential for healing.
Exactly. And that leads us to another really important point, those ethical considerations. As we're, integrating more AI, VR, and mobile technologies into these interventions, we have to be really thoughtful about things like biased data privacy and, making sure that there's human oversight involved.
It's like we're these pioneers
Yeah.
venturing into this uncharted territory. We need to approach it with excitement and a sense of possibility, but also with caution and awareness. Ultimately, these technologies really need to serve humanity, not the other way around.
Couldn't agree more. And as we're, navigating this new terrain, it's important to remember that web-based interventions aren't a one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one person might not work for another.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And it really highlights just how important personalized care is, finding the right tools and approaches for each person's needs.
And that's where the real magic happens. When we can combine that power of technology with the, really irreplaceable human element of therapy, then we can create those truly transformative experiences for people who are struggling with substance use and mental health challenges.
Yeah, it's this beautiful synergy, technology and human expertise working hand in hand to build this, more compassionate and more effective system of care.
Exactly. And as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave our listener with one final thought-provoking idea.
Oh, I love those. Give it to me.
Okay, well, we've talked a lot about how these technologies can help individuals, but what about their potential impact on society as a whole?
Okay, now you're really making me think. What do you mean?
Just imagine a world where these web-based interventions were widely available and affordable and, woven into our healthcare system. What if we could reach people really early on before those struggles became more serious? And what if we could actually break down the stigma surrounding mental health and substance use? So it was easier for people to ask for help.
You're painting this picture of a world where these issues aren't, hidden in the shadows anymore, but they're brought out into the light, where people feel empowered to take charge of their well-being without shame.
Exactly. And what if by addressing these issues more openly and effectively, we could create this, ripple effect of positive change, healthier individuals, stronger families, more resilient communities.
Wow, that is a powerful vision. It's not just about individual healing, it's about transforming our society.
Exactly. And while we're not quite there yet, I really believe web-based interventions can be a driving force for this kind of transformation.
That's an inspiring note to end on. So, as we come back up to the surface from our deep dive into web-based interventions, let's hold on to those pearls of wisdom we've gathered along the way. The potential of these interventions, the importance of human connection, the need to be, ethical and thoughtful as we're integrating all of these new technologies, and that vision of a world where mental health and substance use are no longer taboo, but they're actually seen as opportunities for growth, for healing, for connection.
That was beautifully said. And remember, listener, you're not alone on this journey. There are resources available, there are people who care, and the future is full of hope and possibility.
And that is a wrap on this deep dive into web-based interventions. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep into the world of knowledge.